So it's time to start working out what I'm doing as far as the skin is concerned. Before I get too carried away with that though, I'm going to put the claws for the toes and the fingers in place. So far on this build you've seen me use two different types of the epoxy putty. This is the grey stuff that I'm using. It sets a bit harder by comparison to the white stuff. The white stuff is really what I just had on hand and I was just using it up to work on the skull area. The difference between the two of them is that more commonly the grey stuff is used in metal and the white stuff is used in waterproofing repairs. Other than that, they're pretty similar. They mix together as just that two-part putty. The white stuff is a little bit smoother, which is why I used it across the surface of the skull, because it just smooths out a little nicer than the grey stuff. Here I'm using nylon stockings as a basis for what I'll be putting the silicone over the top of. I'm using two pairs of stockings. One set will be for the arm and the other will be for the legs. And I'm stretching out the excess from each of them to cover up the torso area and the head. Now that I've got the stocking pieces roughly in place to where I want them to be, I'm just stitching them into place by hand so that they hold their position, so that they don't slide around once I start to apply the silicone. So first, a quick demonstration of industry standards. This is one of my work shirts that's due to be retired. It's seen better days, and it's probably going to go in the rag bin for cleaning up around the place before it finally ends up in the final bin. But it's also a bit of an exercise in material science, because anything that's ended up on this is a good example of how that material will react with fabrics. And I've got everything from paint to silicone to bits of resin to super glue and all sorts of things on that. And that's kind of where the original idea of using this sort of stuff over fabric came from, to get the effect that I'm looking for. This is just a cheap air drying silicone or a caulking silicone. In this instance I'm using grey, but they're also available in a clear, a white and a black. And this is what I'm going to be using as the basis for the start of what I'm doing. You could pretty much use any brand you like. The one I'm using here is designed for the use in concrete and guttering, which means it doesn't have that vinegary smell, but depending on your application you could pretty much use both. The only reason you don't want to use the one that smells like vinegar is that that vinegar element will promote rust in certain areas, so you don't want to use that one if you're using anything that's got metal in it. The other advantage with the one that I'm using here is that it has a slightly slower curing time, which just gives me a bit more time to get it smeared over the surface the way I want to. At this point I'm just trying to get it relatively smooth, sort of meld it into the underlying fabric. I'm just about ready to start working on the lower half of him. So I'm going to call that the first layer because I need to stop touching it, because as you start to touch it in certain areas it develops that furry edge and I want to keep this as smooth as I possibly can for the next layer. I'll set that aside now to dry, hanging by these ankles, and I can start working on a bit more once that first layer is cured.
I've been here 5 years. They only owe me the right way up yesterday.
So that layer's dried in really nicely now. It's giving me that sort of skin effect that I'm going for. That's nowhere near as finished as it needs to be, and it's already sort of developing that sort of fold in the skin sort of look that I'm going for. And it's still maintaining the movement really nicely as well. So now I can move on to getting a better covering on his legs, and then building up a thicker covering overall, working out things like the fingers and toes and stuff. And once that final base layer is done, I can start building up the scaling details and the final finishing details of the skin and getting the colour right and all that sort of stuff. So that's pretty much a good covering on the legs for what I need for now. I have started to notice that the arm is becoming a bit loose, so I'll probably do a bit more surgery in there and add in one of those hose clamps to either side of the arm so that they're not dropping down with the additional weight. The shape of them needs to be filled out a little bit more as well, so I'll do that at the same time. You can see there the shape in the shoulder. That's closer to what I'm sort of looking to get, as opposed to this one that needs a little bit more fleshing out under the arm. So I'll add in a couple of different hose clamps on either shoulder just to make sure that his arms can support their position before I start adding those finishing layers. So initially I thought the problem in the joint was in this one, but it's actually in the one that comes off what you would call the spine section. So this is the one that I've got to tighten up. So I need to disconnect the headpiece to get to that as well. So that would be what you call your shoulder sort of shrug sort of position, and that's the one that needs to be tightening up because that's the one that's dropping. So that means it's slightly more involved to get to than I initially thought, but it shouldn't be too much of a problem with a little bit more surgery. Okay, so that's fleshed out the bits that I wanted to sort of pack out at this stage. You can see there I've cut back the areas that are eventually going to be the lips. That'll eventually be stuck on the inside and they'll be fleshed out properly to match the character. You can sort of see as an experiment what I've been doing there as far as the eyelid sort of idea is concerned. These wooden balls are the smaller version, but you can sort of see the effect that I'm going for as far as the silicone and the fabric is concerned once there's a ball behind it. So that'll sort of flesh it out properly as well. So now that I've got a good covering to sort of build off, so they can sort of build up the details around the face with the bones and that sort of stuff, along with the scaling elements on his back and all that sort of thing. And obviously the other big thing that I've got to work on is his ears. I also need to flesh out the rest of his fingers and toes like I've started on this bit here. This one's getting pretty close, but the other two fingers are a little bit thinner than they need to be. And at this stage I haven't really done too much with the feet at all. That'll be sort of more included in the scaling sort of details I'll be putting across the rest of his body. But I think he's looking appropriately creepy, and I'm pretty happy with the way it's coming along. And I'm much happier now with the movement in his shoulders. I can still get that shrug in his shoulders I'm after, and his arm sort of holds position a lot better than it did before. But that'll be the update for this time, guys. Thanks for watching. Talk to you next time.